Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all viewers from all around the world. My name is Frank van der Driest, and I'm hosting the Humanized Growth webinar today with, as a special guest, Andisa Ntsubane. Andisa is not only the CMO of Old Mutual, one of Africa's largest insurance companies. He's also a non-executive director at Cricket South Africa, but he's also African Marketer of the Year of 2021. And last but certainly not least, he's the Humanized Growth Champion of the IRG100 Leadership Program of last year, elected by his peers, all 100 of them. So, Andisa, a very warm welcome. And let me start by asking you, where are you and how are you? And the latter preferably in just one word.
Thanks so much, Frank. Karibu sana jambo is what we say in this part of the world. Good afternoon, and it really is a pleasure to be with you today at the end of the year, reflecting on last year. I'm currently in Sandton in South Africa, and I'm doing very, very well. And I'm really proud to be here today.
So what was that one word that describes how you feel?
Excited.
Excited. What makes you excited?
I think it's been an overwhelmingly exciting year. And when I reflect back on it, and what the world has been able to do this year, and what leaders have been able to do, and what individuals have been able to do to step up to the challenge that has faced us throughout this year, I'm incredibly excited and proud of what we've done. And I think it's really grateful as well to be here at the end of this year, for sure.
Well, definitely, Andisa, I share that excitement. And I think it's also exactly what you pointed out here is what I want to talk about in the next hour. I want to talk about leadership in testing times. I also want to talk about the notion of shared value, about strategic partnerships, and about leading global brands from Africa, and overall leadership lessons learned. At about 2:30, I'll see if there's any questions from the audience and share them with you. Does that work for you as an agenda for the next hour?
I'm really excited and looking forward to the discussion, Frank. Thank you.
Great. Well, Andisa, I mentioned in the intro, you were elected by your 100 peers of the IRG100 CMO Leadership Program as, out of all these 100 Humanized Growth leaders, you were elected the Humanized Growth Champion of the Year. What did that mean for you?
Oh, it was just incredibly humbling, Frank, to have such a wonderful group of peers globally recognizing the work and the efforts and the leadership that one has displayed throughout this year. And I'm incredibly humbled, but extremely proud as well, in terms of some of the work that we've been leading, and through a very difficult and challenging time. So I certainly think, despite a very challenging year, it certainly has been a true blessing for me on a personal level, given some of the recognition that I've received. So a really wonderful, wonderful opportunity and platform. And as I say, being able to interact with 100 CMOs and growth leaders from around the world has been a once-in-a-lifetime experience and opportunity, and certainly continuing with those relationships and connections going forward.
Yeah, that's great, and that's good to hear, and definitely that's a shared sentiment in that community of CMO leaders at the IRG. But maybe you can take the viewers in give them a very short summary of the work you did that actually, the Humanized Growth Plan that you developed and started implementing, that actually was what you presented and why you were elected Humanized Growth Champion.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Frank. I think it was exceptionally fortuitous that halfway through the beginning of the pandemic, I started on the journey on the IRG program. and thinking about the central question of humanized growth in the middle of an unprecedented human crisis, where leaders were being challenged to really respond and rise up to the question of how do we support and respond the world with respect to this challenge. And I think amidst all of the uncertainty, I really made a decision about, in the first instance, setting my mind right. And for me, I really shifted my perception around the pandemic and actually thought to myself that I think COVID is a gift. And I've been saying it consistently throughout this year, that COVID is a gift for all of us, both personally and professionally, to really reflect on the things that are important to us in our individual lives, but also professionally. And certainly professionally, I do think that it is important that leadership brands take leadership positions during crisis. And that's really, really important. And Old Mutual, being a business and a brand that's been around for 176 years and one of the oldest financial institutions on the African continent, it was very important that we as an organization take a stand. Frank, Old Mutual is older than the nation state of South Africa. South Africa, the nation state, was formed in 1910, and Old Mutual was formed way beyond that, before that. Before there was Coca-Cola, there was Old Mutual, 176 years old. And so we are a core part of the fabric of the continent. And during this difficult time, people do look to brands for that leadership. And as a core part of that, following on what we'd done last year, at the beginning of the year, I made a proposition to our CEO and the leadership team on how we should really play a leadership role in terms of our response to COVID-19, and certainly when the vaccination program had already begun. The proposition to the leadership team was that we should play an active role in the vaccination program across the African continent. And we had lots of engagements around how important this would be in terms of us playing a role, but also the impact that this would have in the markets where we operate and for our customers in particular and employees, given the role that we would need to play. And certainly I held the view that there probably would be no better marketing than to invest in helping save lives of our customers, because in actual fact, you can't have humanized growth when humans themselves are at risk. And I think through the engagement with the team and the leadership team all around, through engagements with all of our different markets, we did then make a decision to get involved in vaccination programs. And the path was really about, in the first instance, agreeing that as an organization, we're pro-vaccination and understanding what that means. And then secondly, then making sure that we play that active role in driving that positioning across all the markets, working with key stakeholders, governments across all the markets where we operate, business forums and business communities in terms of those that were supporting government operations in the respective markets, and really making sure that we can collaborate across the piece to support the rollout of vaccination programs on the African continent. And so at the time when I gave my presentation to the IRG leadership program, at that point we had launched in 4 markets across the African continent and really supporting the vaccination program in those markets. And we had a lovely campaign to vaccinate today, rebuild tomorrow. And it was really exciting in terms of really driving that thought leadership positioning. And I thought that there was great appreciation for that work. As things stand now, at the end of the year, we've accelerated that and we're now in 6 countries. We've opened vaccination sites in some key markets, including South Africa. We're using one of our big offices in Cape Town as a vaccination site, and in other markets as well, where we've got significant infrastructure to really open those vaccine sites. We've launched about 2 weeks ago something called Vaxi Taxi. So in addition to having our own offices as vaccination sites, we've also identified the need to actually go out to markets and to areas where the general public can't actually reach us. And so we've got what is called Vaxi Taxis. They're lovely and nicely branded. And we're able to bring vaccinations to the people in those hard to reach areas in terms of that. So I'm really excited about the role that the organization has played, and certainly the support from the leadership team, right up from the CEO, in terms of really being in the forefront of supporting, delivering this across the markets where we operate. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done, as I say, in terms of this, because I do believe that 10 to 15 years from now, people will look back at this moment and they will think about the businesses and the brands that did something in response to this pandemic that we face. And I certainly do know that Old Mutual as a business will be one of those brands and organizations that people think of. And we are seeing it, by the way, in our brand trackers in terms of a brand that's associated with being responsive during times of crisis.
That's a fantastic story. And what strikes me is how logical it sounds, especially if you're in an insurance business. It obviously also, there's also a business case to be made for this. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. But first, look at the moment you got the idea, the moment you started, engaging people, fellow board members at Old Mutual, maybe the exec team. What were even though it sounds so logical, I know these things are not easy and meet with resistance. What have you experienced as the biggest blockers that you encountered, especially in the early stages, and how did you deal with them?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing was really making sure that this type of initiative, given how important it is, and given the varying perspectives on positions individually and morally around vaccinations, and it was important that it is leader-led and it's led from the executive leadership team.
Yeah.
Because there are some people who have very strong views around vaccination and others are anti-vaccination.
Yeah.
And at the time, I think what was really important for us was the whole idea of choice and giving people the choice in terms of our go-to-market strategy to say we want to encourage the public that vaccination is the right decision, and also supporting it with educational programs. Because as you know, there's lots of myths, lots of falsehoods around vaccinations as a general statement. But the main hurdle to cross was really getting alignment and support from the leadership team, because a decision like this has to certainly be led by the executive leadership team. And I do believe that with the great leadership team at Old Mutual, with a big focus following our listing back on the South African Stock Exchange from London in 2018, there was a clear view that the African continent is where our heartland is, and we certainly want to be a brand and a business and organization that supports the aims of the continent in terms of driving shared value. And I think once we got over that hurdle in terms of alignment and agreement that we are pro-vaccination, it was a lot easier in terms of rallying the entire organization in terms of how it would then be implemented from an operational perspective, from a communication perspective, and making sure that we leverage the entire value chain of the organization to deliver on that. And then certainly working alongside all of our different markets, because all the different markets have different approaches, and there's different positions of governments in the different markets where we operate. But certainly taking lessons, and one of the great things of working for a multinational is that ideas come from different places on different markets, and learnings can be shared about what we do in one market relative to another market, and those can be adopted, adapted, and rolled out very quickly. But certainly the big unlock.
Andisa, before we go on about that, tell me a bit more about, because we've had, like, for example, 4 weeks ago, I spoke with Hakan Bulgurli, CEO of Archleague, who I think was very honest about, let's say, the sense of commitment to his humanized growth agenda was pretty varying in his executive team. Now he is the CEO, which probably has, you know, more of an ultimate say than a CMO. How did you, or was it you, or was it maybe you and the CEO? How did you deal with others in the executive leadership team that were, you know, more hesitant? Or how did you overcome that? What were the interventions that brought these people on board?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is about understanding each one of them and understanding their role they play, and the benefits to each. And so the lobbying of each individual member, talking to human capital about the importance of this is not just a customer piece, but our employees are very important as a core part of this process. And certain employees have been front and center. You can't start with customers, not look after employees. From a financial perspective, I'm talking to the CFO about the commercial benefits and working with the actuarial teams around quantifying the benefit of rolling out a program such as this. And certainly it made such commercial sense to the CFO around this that he was actually one of the great advocates for the program. So spending time individually before the kind of big sessions and making sure that you've got understanding and appreciation of concerns and being able to address those concerns with relevant information and insights, which I think was absolutely a key driver given people's perspectives. And so things like making sure you've got the data, you've got the information, you have a clear understanding of impact and what the benefits are to the business for each stakeholder. And I think that was quite an important process to really make sure that ultimately, when the executive leadership team makes this decision, the majority of them have aligned and are fully in support. And I think this is really a testament to the great leadership that we have.
Yeah. Hey, and in the intro, you spoke some big words, saying COVID is a gift. That's the way you look at it. So tell me, in this journey, this humanized growth journey with the vaccination campaign very much at the center, what did you learn? What did you learn about yourself and about the role of marketing in these incredible testing times that COVID have brought us?
Yeah, I've had some very big lessons, personally that I've learned. And I think that the first one is, with all the uncertainty, you have got to make sure that you are creating the right environment for meaningful conversations as a leader. Because all of us, whilst we talk the corporate language, individually, we're all dealing with this. Individually, we are experiencing people that we know and love that are being impacted by the pandemic. And therefore, when you come into the organization, you've got to make sure that you are creating an environment to have positive and meaningful conversations. And I'm a big fan of a gentleman called Tim Wiggum and his work. And Tim Wiggum has done some work around self-mastery. And one of the concepts that he introduces is something called mood set. And the whole idea of mood setting is he argues that it is important to set moods and be conscious about setting moods, because actually you control moods. And he identified it in his work when he actually used to come home and his children used to go into the room and almost peep before they enter to say, what is dad's mood today? Yeah. And he understood the impact that his mood was having in his family life, but also potentially in his work life. And so the importance of setting the right moods and the connection to that in the workplace. And he does a correlation between setting positive moods and productivity. And so the main point that I'm making is being conscious about your ability to set moods in this very difficult time, I think was one of the great lessons, certainly for me, around being sure that you are able to create that environment of positive energy, of openness, so people can, really open up about how they're feeling, and empathy and being empathetic. Because ultimately, and we're all talking about humanized growth, and it's the human at the center. And if we can't be human at this most important moment, then I am afraid we have really missed the plot to really connect with each other, because this pandemic affects all humans. And I think it's the one thing that has really brought that a lot much harder and much more transparent in terms of this time that we're facing. So certainly the importance of setting moods, the importance of being empathetic, but also reflecting deeply on your own life and your own journey, and whether or not you've been living a life pre-pandemic that has been meaningful and in service of your ultimate purpose in life. And I've certainly spent a lot of time thinking about how I could become a better individual, both for my family, but also for the communities that I live in, and this great continent that I'm a core part of.
So
and
give
also
me an example, Andisa. Give me an example on the personal level as a person.
Yeah. Absolutely. So on a personal level, COVID has exposed the most gross inequalities, economically, socially. And, you know, when COVID happened, my son could easily go online and go to school. And I think about so many South African students who are not able to do that because there's no Wi-Fi. I think about whether or not I'm contributing towards social causes. And one of the things, part of the presentation I gave, was about how I'm playing a much bigger role in supporting social causes that can really help to close the gap from an inequality perspective. And so those things have really made me think about how meaningful and the type of contribution I've been able to make to community that I live in, but also to the continent at large. And I spend quite a bit of time talking to young people and also supporting causes that are really going to help to close the gap in terms of some of the challenges that we face. Because you've got to think about some of the things that we take for granted every single day that the majority of people actually struggle with. And I think that this has been a big moment to really think about those things and say, what will you be doing individually and personally to help play a much better life that's in service of helping humans in the communities and countries where we operate.
I want to pick up on that, Andisa. I want to just quickly, sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned something. So I talk more with younger people. What's, you know, take me to one of those situations where you do that. You go to people's homes, at the cricket field maybe. Tell me of such a conversation you had and what it brought you.
Sure. So I get invited to speak at universities, to students at universities. And for example, recently I was speaking to a group at the University of Johannesburg and really talking to them about marketing as a profession and the role that it plays, and practically and tangibly kind of what that means, but also what are some of the leadership lessons that I've learned coming out of COVID and what they need to think about in terms of playing a much more meaningful role in the communities that they operate and serve in, but also linking it to personal brand and how the importance of personal brand in helping to build their social currency, as it were, and really making sure that we really are building a young group of both ethical, but also leaders that are helping in their communities and helping to solve some of the challenges that we face very specifically in South Africa around things like gender-based violence and really some of the social challenges that we face. So I spend a lot of time doing things like that and talking to young people about the role that they need to play in society, but also making sure that we're cultivating a new crop of leaders that can really help to play a meaningful role, not just for themselves from a profit perspective, but really about how to deliver value in the communities that people operate in. And I think that is so important given where we are on this continent. So that's an example of some of the work that I do and the invitations that I have to present and talk to young people to inspire, but also to give them the tools that they need to make sure that they both protect their personal brands, but also play a much more meaningful role in society.
And what did you learn from that? I mean, you inspired them, you educated, Was there any vice versa? What did you learn things from them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first point is about how much one should be doing this, how much more one should be doing this, and how much time I've not wasted, but that I should have started earlier to do this, which I think is important. But also listening to young people and their own challenges and their own disconnects between, for example, the theory that they learn and practically what happens in real life has also been eye-opening. So no doubt, you also learn about some of the practical challenges that they face in dealing with, things like how to manage social media, how to engage when there's peer pressure. And certainly some of those things have been eye-opening because certainly the world has moved. I've got a 13-year-old boy who's constantly, on his gadgets. And how do you manage and understand in the first instance some of the things that they're engaging and dealing with, and also support them given some of the pressures that we've seen, given social media pressures globally, not just on the African continent. So there certainly is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to learn from each other through this great process.
There's I want to pick up on a question from one of our viewers, of which actually many are our fellow IRG100 community members, a community of 300 CMOs by now. This is a question by Chris Foltz, a very active community member, who asked about the role of startups and young entrepreneurs in the Old Mutual growth strategy that you're currently executing.
Sure. So I think one of the greatest opportunities we have is really around new growth and innovation. And there's a new function that's led by a new executive on the leadership team that is focused on new growth and opportunities. And quite certainly building a financial services ecosystem is important to help capture a greater share of growth on the continent. And we certainly have been looking at how we support startups across the continent, but also how they add value to our broader ecosystem, which is really, really important. Because one of the things around strategic partnerships, in fact, growth strategies in general, there are three things you need to do. The first thing you need to do is to say, which customers are you going after and what's the size of the opportunity? The second thing is about developing the how to win. So what must you design and deliver for those markets where you want to win? And the third one is about how you take it to market. But if you can't win in a market that you want, you've got two options. You either abandon that market or you partner with people or incubate strategic partnerships with people who have an opportunity to win or already winning in those markets. And so we certainly see a broader opportunity for an ecosystem play supported by fintech companies, etc., in terms of how we drive that growth on the continent. And we are certainly playing a role. And there's markets, like in Kenya and East Africa more generally, where there's a significant acceleration of startups driven by significant digital penetration in that region. And we're certainly doing great collaborations to help us drive customer acquisition, but also to extend the value that we deliver to shareholders and customers. So it certainly will be an ongoing focus for us as we expand the ecosystem of the organization.
It's, well, I said in the beginning that I'd like to talk more about collaborations and partnerships. You mentioned the word ecosystem. I'm personally deeply convinced, and a lot of IRG data is supporting that being effective at collaboration is no longer, let's say, a nice to have, something that it's actually, it becomes a requirement for success. It's almost like a hygiene factor. Can you talk about what in your views makes a company, good and effective at creating those partnerships and building and thriving in such an ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that there is absolutely no doubt that given some of the issues and challenges that the world is facing, not just COVID, but climate change, social justice issues, gender-based violence, that no one company can do it alone. Yeah. So strategic partnerships and collaboration is absolutely important. And certainly I spoke about how leadership brands need to take leadership positions. So being clear about what positions and what stand you want to take on, and what things you want to champion, and then collaborating with organizations that have similar interests in terms of how you build that network of brands and organizations that are really passionate about key issues that they need to address, but also taking positions and really working together in partnerships. I've spoken about public-private partnerships, and certainly the work and collaboration with business forums in supporting governments in our world in terms of COVID and how that's been driven has been a great example of how we've done that to provide support. And certainly we've seen great collaborations with companies like MTN, which is the largest telecoms provider on the African continent, and their partnership with the African Union, for example, in terms of distributing and getting vaccines to the people of the African continent. So big partnerships like that. We've also seen, by the way, collaboration and partnerships between competitors, because the challenges are just too big. Yeah. And in South Africa, we had all the retailers working together, having co-branded campaigns to drive education and really making sure they're supporting frontline workers across their various markets. And so the importance of strategic partnerships is really, really important, because it is a key driver of both helping to address issues, but also as a key driver of growth. Because if you think about the ways organizations grow, you grow from the core, you grow from new innovation or adjacencies or value-added services, but certainly key partnerships can build additional lines of revenue. And we've seen the likes of telcos, and you think about the financial services within telcos and how that has really grown to almost 35% of revenues in some of the big telecoms companies globally. So that really, really is important. And by the way, lines are becoming a lot blurred between industries and different categories. In fact, there's a bank in Kenya that's in court because it's applying for a telco license, and they're arguing that telcos are banks. And so really making sure that you understand not just the line of business you're in today, but the type of organization you want to be in the future, and making sure that you're building that path in terms of strategic partnerships and where those partnerships could add value to the bottom line, but also provide an enhancement of the value proposition to the customers that you serve.
So it's an interesting concept that have a very clear vision for the kind of company that you want to be in the future. I get that. That's basically your brief for partnerships. Now I know from banks that fintechs are eating left and right from their cake, if you will, and have some seriously, redefining of who they are and what they are to do. How's that for Old Mutual, a insurance company?
Yeah, I think for us, the real opportunity is about how we really make sure that we build a financial services ecosystem, moving into the future. The world around us is shifting so quickly. If you think about our organization 15, 20 years ago, 90% of our business is through face-to-face, having advisors physically going to see customers. But the acceleration of digital and transformation has meant a significant shift in terms of our strategy now of really delivering what we call channel of choice, and being able to give customers the opportunity and the choice of either going online to do straight through purchasing, or making sure that they go through advisors, but also making sure that we help our advisors and distribution partners with technology, so they can also be tech-enabled to deliver a better experience for end customers. So that's kind of where we are now. But certainly moving into the future, it's about how do we build that platform and that ecosystem to make sure that we can deliver value-added services, but also enter other markets and territories that we currently aren't in today. And if you think about a lot of the things that are happening around us, from mobile money payments to cryptocurrencies, you can imagine where some of these opportunities can go in terms of the type of organization and business that we can become. But it is about making sure that you are relevant, you're up to date with the times, but the core essence of the brand remains the same. And I'm reminded of a conversation about how a brand like Old Mutual, which has the name Old in it, that's 176 years old, reinvents itself. And certainly, our view is that we've got to think like a challenger. So we're a leader brand that thinks like a challenger brand. And that's really important, because when you think like a challenger, you are not limited in your views around the categories that you play in, the markets that you must compete in, and the type of propositions that you need to build and bring to market over a 5 to 10 year horizon, which I think is really, really important.
Hey, and in that, let's say in that process of redefinition of markets and so on, if you look at the role of marketing and how that was, let's say 5 years ago, I don't know how many years ago you joined Old Mutual, but let's say since you joined Old Mutual, how has the role of marketing evolved?
It is fundamentally accelerated. I think marketing has moved from in fact, I argue that if the role of marketing is to do marketing, then we're in the wrong space. The role of marketing has certainly transformed in our organization from just being the people that do the advertising and the communications.
Yeah.
We've really moved into a space where marketing is at the heart of, in the first instance, being very much externally focused and identifying the trends and the things that are happening in the world around us, and the big insights, from climate change insights to customer needs evolution, to just across the board, across multiple stakeholders, and being the people that are able to translate and have foresight into where opportunities are going to come from, and align the internal engine of the organization to make sure that we can capture a greater share of that. But certainly in some of these difficult moments, it is also about identifying growth and growth opportunities, which is why when you talk about humanized growth, it certainly resonated with me in terms of some of the work that we've been doing to try and really accelerate the role that we're playing, because marketing now is the place that the business comes to when it is looking for how can we find and optimize growth opportunities, how can we identify new markets, what are some of the trends and insights that we can leverage to make sure that we drive that growth. And certainly we've done a lot of work. An example of some of the work that we've done is we kicked off a project called Project 2030 last year, and we've just finished phase 2 now, that was identifying the biggest growth opportunities between now and 2030 across business lines and for business lines, across customer segments. And what was quite exciting is that we worked with an organization that has a data set of all sub-Saharan cities that have a population of 50,000 people or more. So now we could see which cities are going to be growing over the next 10 years. And looking at where we are today and saying, do we have footprint in those markets? Do we have intentions to be in those markets? And almost being able to skate to where the puck is going to be. And marketing is at the center of helping to inform the business around those growth opportunities. And that certainly has done a lot of work to shift perceptions around the role that we're playing when we're starting to talk the language of the business, but also the commercial opportunities between now and the next 10 years. And that was phase 1. And now we've just completed almost the how to win. So now that we know where those opportunities are, how do we capture those opportunities in a way that's pragmatic, but also that's got intention behind it in terms of how we prioritize those opportunities. So I do certainly think we've done a significant amount of work in helping to shift the perception, speak the language of the business. And I think commercial acumen is certainly a massive, massive lever in terms of some of those core shifts. And even with things like the vaccination program, it wasn't philanthropy at all. As you say, there was a very strong correlation between vaccinating customers and the impact from a risk mitigation on the business, because the more people are impacted, the more claims we pay. But we had to go and do the work, partnering with actuaries in the business to do modeling in terms of what those implications could be.
So you're not afraid that there'll soon be a chief growth officer above the marketing function, as we've seen in the past in some other companies?
Yeah, look, I think for me, it really is about ultimately repositioning the function. And if that's the outcome, there's no issues whatsoever. But what it can't be is that marketing are just perceived as the people, that do campaigns and communication, organize events and functions. Yeah. We are a strategic growth enabler and a strategic partner to the business, which I think is really, really important.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I don't know if you've seen, but I spoke about a month and a half or so with Angela Ahrens.
Yes,
and she made a very interesting comment about the role of the CMO. And she said, well, actually, until now, it was typically the CFO or the COO who would be a successor to the CEO, the most likely candidate. She said, given in an environment where we see that outperformers push for a humanized growth agenda, i.e. for multi-stakeholder value creation, and actually the CMO qualifies very much as the potential successor to CEO. What do you think? And did you consider your career implications of that comment?
Look, what I do know is that the tenure of CMOs is getting shorter and shorter, which is worrisome on the one hand.
Yeah.
But I do think that the role that has probably transformed the most over the last decade is the role of the CMO. And if you think about the learning and the trajectory around some of the things that chief marketing officers have to be aware of today, it's certainly, I think, a wonderful platform because marketers today not only have to understand the business of marketing and the commercial aspects that I spoke about, but marketers also have to understand technology. And you will be aware that there's now chief marketing technology officers, and there's been lots of and studies from the likes of Microsoft that also speak about how marketers will have a bigger budget than chief technology officers moving into the future.
Yeah.
And then the people side of it and having the understanding of driving employee brand and then customer experience. It certainly is quite a lot in terms of the scope, the ambit that a CMO has. And I think we are one of the most fortunate people in organizations because we actually have a broad spectrum of the entire organization. And therefore, we are well poised to be able to guide, advise across the board in terms of how we drive that humanized growth in the organizations that we work for. And so it's a bit of a blessing and a curse, but I do think that we are well poised for leadership. And I'm not surprised that a lot of CMOs have become CEOs.
Yeah, and so obviously I was going to ask, so what do you do to develop yourself and to be able to actually work with all these different functions and all these different skills? Obviously, you joined the IRG100 leadership program, but what else? I mean, where do you get your learning and your inspiration to ready yourself for a future where indeed your budget might be bigger than that of the CTO, for example, where indeed you will work joined at the hip with the CHRO and with the CFO to make the business case for the growth initiatives, etc. That's a lot for one role and one person. How do you deal with that and prepare yourself for that?
Yeah, it is. I think in the first instance, you've got to have this burning desire and appetite to consistently learn and challenge yourself for that growth. And I certainly have been on that as part of my personal reflection on what I need to do. And one of the things that I've been very interested in is the impact of the fourth industrial revolution, not just on marketing, but across the industries, across industries. And when you read the World Economic Forum around future jobs, and all of those things, it does make you think about, how do you become relevant in the future? And so, this year, one of the things that I've been doing, and I'm finalizing it now, is I'm writing a thesis. And my thesis is on AI, and how it can be used for good in the context of the African continent. And so now I'm learning about AI and thinking about fourth industrial revolution and the implications of AI technologies across industries, thinking about ethics of AI, but thinking about it from an African perspective, because I do think the continent of Africa has a lot of opportunities in terms of how even technology companies and international brands can think about their path to entry, given some of the frameworks that can be used to make sure that some of the things that are happening from an ethics perspective around AI technology globally almost have a softer landing on the continent, but how can it also be used to help accelerate socioeconomic transformation on the continent? Frank,
one example of something, when you went on this learning journey around AI, just with the audience here, give us one example of something that you learned that was truly surprising and insightful for you in this space of marketing and AI.
Yeah, I just, there are so many lessons. But for example, one of the things around AI is about how you design for the outcomes that you want. And we do know that there's been significant challenges using technology to almost discriminate against certain groups. Just one example. And how do you make sure that it's used in a manner that can actually help to really accelerate equality across various groups? And one of the things that I've said consistently is that the continent of Africa, more than any other continent, I think has the greatest opportunity because of the challenges that we face here. And I do think that AI has a significant role and opportunity to help us to move and leapfrog some of the issues across multiple spaces like education, for example, and how can it be used to really help us think very differently, and how can it help to educate and help learners to optimize their learning experience? How can it be helped to improve the pedagogy of how teachers teach, given the context of the African continent? So I'm really excited about the prospects of AI in both the ability to not do harm, but on the other side, to help accelerate socioeconomic transformation and equality, which I think is really, really important given the context of the African market.
So what would your actionable recommendation to the audience that says, hey, okay, I hear you on these two opportunities. What would be your recommendation? I know you haven't finished your thesis yet, but still you might have a recommendation.
No, I guess the big insight is really about there's no one size fits all. And you've got to take into account the context within which you're designing technology solutions. And certainly the continents are different, the issues are different, And how you prioritize those is also something that's important to help think about. So the first thing is about, context, which I think is really, really important in terms of how you design those solutions. And secondly, how do you build in that ability to scale and adapt, and to consistently involve people in that process of how you reduce the impact or the negative implications that technology might have. So those are some of the things, but I'm certainly looking forward to sharing some of those outcomes once it's done, and also to talk about the differences between the African perspective relative to some of the global perspectives from a technology perspective.
Well, I'll hold you to that. We'll invite you at the IRG. But hey, so that's a nice segue into the last topic I wanted to talk about is you talk about the difference between Africa and the rest of the world. Let's talk about managing global brands that are African. So I don't know how global Old Mutual is or brands in their portfolio, but tell me a little bit about what you learned. You also worked at Standard Bank. What you learned about managing global brands that operate in such wildly different contexts, Africa and other continents.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. My starting point is to talk about why I love Africa. And I love Africa for a very interesting reason. It is because it's got the most problems and the most issues than any other continent. And issues and problems create opportunities. Yeah. And I certainly think what we need is more business models that help to accelerate social issues. And that really is what shared value is about. Yeah. The creation of business models that help to accelerate social issues. And if you think about the continent of Africa, we've got the most issues, therefore the biggest opportunity for businesses to also make money. Because the more issues, in fact, the most successful companies in the world have solved intense needs and solved issues. And therefore, that's where the big opportunity is. But what is important is this whole debate around who the ultimate custodians of brands are, the organizations themselves or the customers that help to shape and influence it based on the markets that they operate in. And no doubt, despite brand owners driving the intent, the core essence of a brand, which I think is really, really important, and consistent positioning, customers have a massive influence in shaping brands and the experience of those brands. And globally, thinking about Heinz and the ketchup in terms of how it's manifested in terms of design and the experience, but also on the continent, our position in this global versus local, one size fits all messaging approach across all markets. Our view is that we win in the markets where we operate. We don't win from head office. And so whilst it's important to keep the core essence, the strategic strategy and the positioning consistent in terms of that meaningful differentiation, we do and must win in the markets where we operate. And so we've got to take into account those local nuances. And the example that I'll use is we had a global campaign or a Pan-Africa campaign across all the markets where we operate in support of COVID. And the idea was to roll it out across all our markets. But of course, we have one market, Tanzania, that didn't even believe that there was COVID to begin with. And therefore, you can't go into that market with a massive COVID campaign. We would absolutely kill our business. And so you've got to take the local insights and the local input as a core part of how you build your execution strategies.
So how did you do that in Tanzania?
Well, we obviously played behind the scenes, and the business community in Tanzania has been doing a lot of work to influence government. And we did have, the passing of the former president who was anti, and certainly with the new president, we've seen significant shifts and strides. But there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes, lobbying, et cetera, to make sure that vaccines can get to the people of that market. And we've certainly been playing a role within that. But the point is really about making sure we win in the markets where we operate and we take into account some of those pieces. And then I think that there's a significant opportunity as well in terms of our agency networks and partners that work with us, in terms of harnessing those insights and those ideas. And I think one of the benefits of managing a brand across multiple geographies is that ideas can come from anywhere. And you are able to adapt and adopt ideas from one market and adapt it into another market, which I think is really, really great. And that does help to create the space and opportunity for innovation. And certainly, what we've got to do as clients is to help to unlock that creativity and innovation from our agency partners. They certainly have a lot of value to add. And I think that the way we build and nurture those relationships, the way we drive collaboration across markets is going to be really, really important in terms of extracting that value and helping to drive efficiency and effectiveness across the continent. And we certainly have reaped the benefits in terms of some of the work that we've done across the continent. And I'm proud that, last year and this year, what the Brand Finance released, the most valuable brands on the African continent, and Old Mutual is ranked as the most valuable insurance brand on the African continent. And we certainly are proud of the work that we've done. In fact, there is a global 100 insurance brands, so globally, and Old Mutual has ranked 72nd out of 100 globally, but it's the only African insurer on the global 100, which affirms our position as the most valuable insurance brand on the African continent, and something that we're certainly very, very proud of in terms of the work that we've done, but also the value and the contribution and the support that we receive from all of our different stakeholders.
And you, as you were nominated, or actually not nominated, also elected the African Marketing of the Year and the Humanized Growth Champion of the Year. Andisa, we're coming to a close. Before we close, though, I want to ask you, if there's one message, one thing that our viewers should hear and should take home, one call to action or actionable recommendation that you want to share before we end this, what is that?
If I can say it in a very short story, there was a wonderful article written a few years ago about why the All Blacks rugby team always win and consistently win over decades. And the author came to the conclusion that they have something called divine discontent. They're never quite satisfied. Even when they've won, they go back and check, where did we make mistakes? How can we improve? How can we improve? And my big message is, I think in all of us, we need to continue to have that sense of divine discontent, both personally and professionally, to say, what more can we do on an individual basis in terms of self-development, and professionally to help be the catalyst of driving that change within our organizations that can really impact our communities and drive that humanized growth in the benefit of all stakeholders for the markets where you operate.
I love this notion of divine discontent. Actually, it struck me when my fellow countryman, Max Verstappen, became world champion Formula One in a pretty hectic season. He was asked, so are you going to celebrate? He said, yeah, just for this tiny little bit, because he's already, like, what's next? And rather than lay back, relax, and enjoy, that's indeed divine discontent, a beautiful concept. Andisa, I want to thank you for sharing your stories, for sharing pearls of wisdom and experiences that you've gone through. Viewers from all around the world, this was the last Humanized Growth webinar of the year. We'll kick off next year with Sanda Ojambo, the president of the United Nations Global Compact. A hugely important and powerful player in driving a more humanized growth agenda among the 13,000 companies that are member of the UN Global Compact. So looking forward to see you then. But before that, I wish you a beautiful end of the year. I want to thank you, Andisa, and all safe back in the new year. Bye-bye.